Okay, for our final part today, we're going to be talking about 117 through 120, or as I like to call it, just the 8th of July, 1838. So we're going to start here out of order. I'm going to go in the order that the revelations were actually given. So what we're going to do is section 118, then an unpublished revelation, then section 119, section 120, and 117. But all of these were given on the same day. So I'm going to start with section 118. It says, that our earliest copy is found in Brigham Young's journal, which is written in his own hand. We also get a copy of this found in Wilford Woodruff's Book of Revelations. We get it in Willard Richards' Pocket Companion and in the Manuscript History of the Church. Again, we're volume 3 of what they later printed off as the History of the Church. Circumstantial introduction to this for section 118, and for the rest of it, really. I'll just give it to you now, and you can just rinse and repeat this for the rest of it. The Brigham Young Journal gives us revelation given July 8th, 1838 at Far West Caldwell County, Missouri. Shew unto us thy will, O Lord, concerning the 12. And this is very similar to what we get in our modern section headings, so those don't change. But again, they're kind of taking from the original revelations what the section headings are in today's scriptures. The Woodruff and Richard books have the same introductions as well. The manuscript history departs a little bit, adds a personal flair to it, and says, also, I received the following, revelation concerning the 12, revelation given at Far West, July 8th, 1838. Shew unto us thy will, O Lord, concerning the 12. Answer. So it's kind of a question and answer. And then you get into the revelation itself. So I thought that was fun. Show us concerning the 12? Well, here's your answer. And there we go. All right, modern section headings, about the same, and follow what we've just read. So let's go to the historical introduction, because we have a lot of trouble in the high offices in the church, and we have a lot of cleaning to do. So the historical introduction gives us this. On Sunday, the 8th of July, 1838, Joseph Smith dictated 5 revelations in Far West, Missouri, each of which concerned church leadership or finances. One of these revelations regarded the quorum of the 12 apostles. The quorum had not been immune to the dissent and disaffiliation that plagued the church in 1837 and 1838. Apostles Luke Johnson and John F. Boynton renounced the church in December of 1837 and were consequently excommunicated by the High Council. In the quarterly conference held 7th and 8th of April, 1838, David W. Patton gave a report on the quorum and stated that he could not recommend Lyman Johnson or William E. McClellan. Lyman Johnson, who may have sympathized with his brother Luke, was excommunicated for various transgressions on the 13th of April, 1838. We talked about that earlier. McClellan, who had been troubled with the church and Joseph Smith for some time, was, quote, found in transgression in a church trial held on the 11th of May. Joseph Smith apparently began selecting replacements for disaffected members of the quorum before he departed Kirtland, Ohio for Far West on the 12th of January. For example, John E. Page and John Taylor had been designated as replacements for Luke Johnson and Boynton as early as January of 1838, and they are mentioned in this revelation. We also get this, however. Despite the turmoil in the church, most of the apostles remained loyal to Joseph Smith or repaired their relationships with him, and many were serving missions or were expected to serve in the near future. I like to argue that somebody like Wilford Woodruff, for example, I think was spared a lot of this because he was just gone. Heber C. Kimball, he was on a mission during all this, just, all this nonsense. He was going off and doing his thing. So, they were sort of spared that by being on mission. So this is going to be the same kind of thing we get for the next few revelations. It says, in Joseph Smith's journal, this revelation appears as the first of 5 revelations dictated on the 8th of July. Joseph Smith's journal entry for 8th of July introduces the first 3 revelations by stating they were read to the congregation that met earlier that day, but does not specify whether the 4th or 5th revelations were read at the same time. The 5th revelation, addressed to William Marks, Newell K. Whitney, and Oliver Granger, was copied into a letter the First Presidency wrote later in the day to Marks and Whitney. The letter states that the revelation had been received this morning. The order in which the revelations were copied into Joseph Smith's journal suggests that all 5 revelations were dictated on the morning of the 8th of July, apparently in the leadership meeting mentioned in the introduction to the first revelation. All right, so we got some replacement members here. As presented in Joseph Smith's journal, the revelation was a direct response to the plea to show unto us thy will, O Lord, concerning the 12. The revelation named new apostles, Taylor, Page, Woodruff, and Willard Richards, to replace those who had been removed. And it also directed all the members of the quorum to prepare for a mission over the great waters the following spring. All right, so let's get into the content and footnotes of this. The text gives us, and next spring let them depart to go over the great waters, and there promulge my gospel, the fullness thereof, and to bear record of my name. Let them take leave of my servants in the city far west on the 26th day of April next, on the building spot of my house, saith the Lord. Footnote 9 for this says, 4 days prior to this revelation, the church dedicated the cornerstones for the far west temple according to directions in a 26 April 1838 revelation. The revelation also instructed the Latter-day Saints to recommence laying the foundation of my house. On the 26th of April 1839, the apostles apparently intended to depart from the temple site in connection with this recommencing of the temple's construction. Though the Latter-day Saints were expelled from Missouri in early 1839, some of the apostles returned to the temple site to formally begin their mission as directed in the Revelation. Now, this is kind of a famous story that, under distress, and like this was a known revelation, the apostles still went back to the cornerstones to start their mission in far west, even though they knew they might get shot. But they did it. They were able to get away with it. Nobody caught them, and they started their missions. So that's kind of a famous Brigham Young story. He was part of that as well. Also, just to kind of point through this too, is the idea that the Far West Temple is one of the only ones that has been left unbuilt. So, and this is amateur historian, but as of 2024, so this is 2025 that I'm recording this, as of 2024, the church has actually bought the Kirtland Temple. So that's kind of back into the possession of the church. And then you also have the Nauvoo Temple was burned by an arson. That's been rebuilt, and that is an operating temple now. And so now you have Far West, like even Winter Quarters, I think they dedicated a site for it. That has a temple on it now. Far West is still a bunch of stones in the ground that is maintained as a historical site, but we have not built that temple back. So it's still just kind of sitting in the state that it was in. It was never actually built. All right, anyway. We get the calling of new men to replace those who had left. You get this from the text. Let my servant John Taylor, and also my servant John E. Page, and also my servant Wilford Woodruff, and also my servant Willard Richards, be appointed to fill the places of those who have fallen, and be officially notified of their appointment. So, 2 future presidents of the church are called here. Just wanted to point that out. Footnote 11 says this. The calling of the new apostles may have been related to the apostolic mission over the great waters commanded in this revelation. John Taylor, an English native who lived in Upper Canada, had been instrumental in the conversion of the English-Canadian missionaries who accompanied Apostles Heber C. Kimball and Orson Hyde on their mission to England, and who had helped arrange their original contacts there. John E. Page was completing a successful mission in Upper Canada and was expected to travel to Missouri with a large group of newly converted Latter-day Saints. Wilford Woodruff, a member of the first quorum of the 70, was serving a successful mission in New England and had spent a few months preaching in the Fox Islands off the coast of Maine. Woodruff and others saw great significance in preaching the gospel in and gathering the house of Israel from the islands of the sea, as the Old Testament prophet Isaiah had prophesied, and as Joseph Smith's revelations had commanded. Willard Richards had joined Apostles Heber C. Kimball and Orson Hyde on their mission to England and continued proselytizing there after his companions returned to America. So that's where these men come from. But yeah, Wilford Woodruff, John Taylor, these people become presidents of the church. And if you don't know, it's Joseph Smith and then Brigham Young and then John Taylor and then Wilford Woodruff. So pretty significant what this revelation is. So that's all you get from the revelation that we're going to give you. And then we get an unpublished revelation. This is part of the Newell K. Whitney papers. It is not from the Isaac Grew collection. So this is in the actual church history library, not at BYU. And it is in the handwriting of Newell K. Whitney. It is given on the same day as sections 117 through 120, but this one was just never canonized. We also get a Frederick G. Williams copy of this. which kind of makes sense considering what it is. So the text reads this. I'll just read the whole thing because we read unpublished revelations. It says, Revelation given July 8th, 1838 in far west Missouri. O Lord, what is thy will concerning W. W. Phelps and F. G. Williams? Verily, thus saith the Lord, in consequence of their transgressions, their former standing has been taken away from them. And now, if they will be saved, let them be ordained as elders in my vineyard, church, to preach my gospel, and to travel abroad from land to land and from place to place, to gather mine elect unto me, saith the Lord, and let this be their labors from henceforth. Amen. So you have been demoted. And on the, we also get a docket here on the lower left page. It's kind of upside down. That just kind of dockets what this is. So that is the unpublished revelation, basically saying you guys messed up. You no longer hold your positions, and you are to serve a mission and just be elders now. So that is that. Now we get into section 119. This is the tithing revelation that we get. The original copy that we get is an individual page with Edward Partridge's handwriting on it. The docket with tithing, just the word tithing, is written on the back. We get a Newell K. Whitney copy in his own hand with some text on the other side, which is kind of fun. There is another Edward Partridge copy. And then we get a copy in the 1844 Doctrine and Covenants, which I won't share, but also the manuscript history. This is volume 3 of the history of the church, as we've said before. So what's the introduction to this? Well, it's kind of a question and answer. So the original version that we have, the most original copy from Edward Partridge, says, Far West, July 8th, 1838, a revelation. Question, O Lord, show unto thy servants how much thou requirest of the properties of thy people for a tithing. Answer. And then you get your answer. We get the same thing for Newell K. Whitney's copy, Edward Partridge's copy, so it's all pretty much the same. The manuscript history gives us this. It says, And the same day I inquired of the Lord and received the following, July 8th, revelation on tithing. Given at Far West, July 8th, 1838, which was also read in public. O Lord, show unto thy servant how much thou requirest of the properties of thy people for a tithing. Answer. You get the answer. There's no change to modern section headings, so we'll leave those alone. And then we get this from the historical introduction, because we've had money problems for years. An 1831 revelation on the laws of the Church of Christ directed the Latter-day Saints to consecrate their property to the church bishop, and then manage stewardships of property or other responsibilities assigned to them. Church members attempted to follow this program of consecration and stewardship in Jackson County, Missouri, but their attempts ended when they were driven out of the county in 1833. In the early and mid-1830s, Joseph Smith and other church leaders in Ohio engaged in a number of business and banking ventures, most of which ultimately failed. The troubled situation of church finances was compounded by the nationwide panic of 1837 and the ensuing economic recession. During this period, Joseph Smith and Sidney Rigdon incurred several $1,000s of debt. And just to kind of put this into perspective, just financial history of the United States, there used to be a ton of recessions and depressions and panics in the 1800s until in the 20th century, the Federal Reserve came up with a unified United States dollar. It wasn't until the 20th century that they did that. So let's try 2%. We get this from the historical introduction. It says, in September, the church published an appeal from Bishop Newell K. Whitney and his counselors in Kirtland, calling on church members everywhere to bring their tithes into the storehouse, to relieve church debts, and to help establish the community of saints in Missouri. While this general request did not include recommended donation amounts, in December of 1837, a committee composed of Edward Partridge, the Bishop of Zion, Isaac Morley, the first counselor to the bishopric, and John Quarles, the appointed keeper of the Lord's storehouse, proposed that every head of household be asked to annually donate a certain percentage of net worth, with the percentage based on church needs for the year. To cover anticipated church expenses for 1838, the committee proposed a tithing of 2%. The committee believed that such a program would be, in some degree, fulfilling the law of consecration. So the original number was 2, just so you know. So the interpretation of surplus property was a little bit lacking. I got a kick out of this one. The resulting revelation called for the Latter-day Saints to consecrate all of their surplus property and thereafter to pay 1/10 of all their interest annually. Robinson, who was present at the leadership meeting, may have transcribed the revelation as Joseph Smith dictated it. Now, just to pause here for a second. In the revelation, you get, hey, after you give all your surplus property, then you're going to give 10% of your income. That's the tithing to this day. So that's where we get into. We're just going to talk about the first part of it here. The revelation was read later that day to a congregation of Latter-day Saints. Over the next few weeks, church members responded to the revelation by consecrating surplus property. According to the 27 July entry in Joseph Smith's journal, quote, "Some time past, the brethren or saints have come up day after day to consecrate and to bring their offerings into the storehouse of the Lord. They have come up hither, thus far according to the order of the Danites." Unquote. Officers in the Danite Society had attended the leadership meeting in which Joseph Smith apparently dictated this revelation, and members of the society were now helping gather the consecrated goods. The success in collecting surplus property apparently did not last long. John Corll, the keeper of the storehouse, recounted in 1839 that the Danites, quote, "set out to enforce the law of consecration, but this did not amount to much," unquote. Brigham Young, who was serving in the pro tempore church presidency in Zion, recollected several years later that church members were sparing in what they considered surplus property. Makes sense. I don't know if that's surplus. Maybe I'll keep that. Maybe I need that, which I find just very enlightening, very engaging. So, yeah, you never know when your surplus property will come in handy. Footnote to this introduction says this, because there are some questionable accusations about finances at the time. So, Ebenezer Robinson, the clerk for the High Council, recounted decades later that he was antagonistic toward Joseph Smith, that the High Council approved an annual stipend of $1,100 for each member of the presidency. That when church members heard of the decision, they, quote, lifted their voices against it. That the High Council therefore revoked the decision, and that Joseph Smith dictated the revelation on consecration and tithing a few days later. As these decisions are not documented in extant High Council minutes, Robinson's veracity regarding this episode is questionable. So he's trying to say, hey, they only did 10% because Joseph wanted a salary, but we have no proof for that. So that could just be him talking. It could be real. Who knows? We don't know. So let's get into the content and footnotes of this. The revelation says this: "Verily thus saith the Lord, I require all their surplus property to be put into the hands of the bishop of my church of Zion for the building of mine house, and for the laying of the foundation of Zion, and for the priesthood, and for the debts of the presidency of my church." Footnote 2 for this says, property was already considered surplus if it could not be put to good use by the owner. In a council meeting held 26th of July, 1838, it was agreed that the first presidency would keep all their properties that they can dispose of to their advantage and support, and the remainder be put into the hands of the bishop or bishops, agreeably to the commandments and revelations. Brigham Young later shared his understanding that church members were asked to donate property, such as land and cattle, that they could not, quote, make use of to advantage, unquote. So basically, if you've got like 15 cows and you really just don't need 15 cows, then you would consecrate the surplus to somebody else. And that's kind of I would love to be in that situation. Like, hey, I've got 10 Ferraris. I don't need all 10. I need 9, but not 10, right? So surplus property. That's me being the amateur historian. All right, so the famous law of the tithe. Here we go. It says, "And this shall be the beginning of the tithing of my people. And after that, those who have been thus tithed shall pay 1/10 of all their interest annually. And this shall be a standing law unto them forever for my holy priesthood, saith the Lord." So let's get a little confusing with interest, shall we? So footnote 7 to this says, 2 weeks later, Partridge wrote a letter to Newell K. Whitney, the bishop in Kirtland, in which Partridge explained that the saints are required to give all their surplus property into the hands of the bishop of Zion, and after this first tithing, they are to pay annually 1/10 of all of their interest. That is, if a man is worth $1,000, the interest on that would be $60 and 1/10. Of the interest will be, of course, $6. Thus you see the plan. So a 6% was a common interest rate at the time. Both Ohio and Missouri statutes fixed interest rates at 6% if no other rate was agreed upon. So we don't do interest, but apparently that's the original part. Is like not only is it a tenth, but you also have to pay interest on it because of the annualness of it all. So thank heavens we don't do that because that's just a mess. And who wants to do taxes like that? Anyway, the last portion of the revelation that we get says this. Verily I say unto you, it shall come to pass that all those who gather unto the land of Zion shall be tithed of their surplus properties, and shall observe this law, or they shall not be found worthy to abide among you. And behold, I say unto you, if my people observe not this law to keep it holy, and by this law sanctify the land of Zion unto me, that my statutes and my judgments may be kept thereon, that it may be most holy, behold, verily I say unto you, it shall not be a land of Zion unto you. And this shall be an ensample unto all the stakes of Zion, even so, amen. So footnote 10 for this says, this passage echoes the phrasing in Deuteronomy that refers to the law of Moses, which the Israelites were commanded to live by in their promised land. So a lot of parallels there. So there you go. There's the law of tithing, and thank heavens we don't have to do a freaking like interest rate based on this state or whatever. What a mess. Anyway. All right. So now we get into section 120, and this is a very brief section, and it is what I like to call the Council on the Disposition of the Tithes, because that is what the church calls it every time we do an audit report for General Conference. So let's get into it. The earliest copy we get is the Scripture Book of Joseph Smith. This is the handwriting of George W. Robinson. It is a very clean copy with a slash, like you do. Frederick G. Williams gets to have a copy, and then we also get a copy in the manuscript history of the church. So the introduction for this says, the earliest copy that we get, revelation given the same day, July 8th, 1838, making known the disposition of the properties tithed as named in the preceding revelation. Once again, we get the same introduction in modern section headings, and this is the same introduction for the manuscript history. And there's no difference in those modern section headings. It's all pretty much the same. So Freddie's copy is a little different, but not by much. It says revelation given the same day on the disposal of the property of the church. So a little different there. Historical introduction gives us a little more. It says, the third revelation directed the Latter-day Saints to consecrate surplus property to the church as the beginning of the tithing of my people, and then to donate 1/10 of their interest annually. Robinson's headnote for the fourth revelation featured here states that it was given in reference to, quote, the disposition of the properties tithed as named in the preceding revelation, unquote. This short revelation directed that the donated property be managed by a council consisting of the First Presidency, Bishop Edward Partridge and his counselor in the Zion bishopric, and the Zion High Council, all acting together under the inspiration of God. Whereas the first three 8th of July revelations included the journal entry for that day were read to the congregation of saints at the worship services later that day, it is unclear whether this fourth revelation was also read at that time. On the 26th of July, 1838, the council that was called for in this revelation met as directed. So they actually did get together and do their thing. So there you go. Yeah. So the revelation is very short, so I'll just read it to you. This is content and footnotes now. Verily, thus saith the Lord, the time has now come that it shall be disposed of by a council composed of the first presidency of my church, and of the bishop and his council, and by my high council, and by mine own voice unto them, saith the Lord, even so, amen. That's the whole thing. Footnote 2 for this says, it is unclear whether the high council included the pro tempore Zion presidency at Far West, which ordinarily presided over the council, or whether the first presidency was to preside directly over the body of 12 counselors, as the presidency had in Kirtland. When the Zion High Council met on the 31st of August, 1838, Sidney Rigdon and Hiram Smith presided directly over the 12 counselors. The Zion presidency was apparently not present. This was the last High Council meeting recorded before Joseph Smith was taken prisoner by Missouri officials in November of 1838. And this council is referred to every year. There's always a church audit report that is spoken in the council, in the general conference of the church. And it says, based on the revelation of the disposition of the tithes, they are actually referring to section 120. So that is quoted every single year in a general conference, and the church sort of makes an accounting of how they spent their money. All right, now we get into section 117, which will be, I believe, our last for the day. Like I said, a little out of order. I'm just going in the order that it was given in the Joseph Smith papers, which is technically the original, so whatever. Anyway, the earliest copy we get is actually a loose paper in the handwriting of Edward Partridge. And the phrase, the only thing that's really weird about this is that we get a phrase struck out, which is, "And whatsoever remaineth, let it remain in your hands." And I'll get to that in just a moment. But otherwise, a very clean copy. We also get a copy in a letter to William Marks and Newell K. Whitney, which is written by Newell K. Whitney, which is in the hand of him anyway. That's his handwriting. We get a copy from that's in the hands of James Mulholland. Willard Richard's pocket companion gets one copy. Joseph Smith's scriptory book is also a copy, but apparently the Edward Partridge one came first. We also get one from Lydia Dribble, probably in her own hand, but that's the copy that we get, is Lydia Dribble's copy. And we obviously get one in the manuscript history of the church. So, the most original introduction that we get for this from the Edward Partridge copy says, "A revelation given at Far West, July 8th, AD 1838. The Mulholland copy, the journal copy, has the same thing, and we actually don't get any introduction on Lydia's copy, so she just slides right into that. We do, in the letter to Marks and Whitney, we get Far West, July 8th, 1838. President William Marks and Bishop Newell K. Whitney, N.K. Whitney, GNT, which I believe granted, or gentlemen, we send you by the hand of Brother Oliver Granger a revelation received this morning, which reads as follows." So, hey, in your mailbox is a revelation. There you go. The manuscript history gives us this. Revelation to William Marks, N.K. Whitney, and O. Granger. And I received the following revelation, given to William Marks, Newell K. Whitney, and Oliver Granger, and others, Zion, July 8th, 1838. No differences in modern section headings here, so we'll just light right into the Joseph Smith papers. So the historical introduction gives us this. The revelation directed Marks and Whitney to relocate to Missouri before winter. Once in Missouri, they were to preside over the saints in their respective callings, Marks as president of the church in Missouri, and Whitney as a bishop in Adamond-Ioman. Granger was to return to Kirtland and continue to act as an agent for the first presidency in settling remaining business affairs, thereby allowing Marks and Whitney to move to Missouri sooner. And he was mostly unsuccessful there. This is actually a point of sadness in Oliver Granger's life later on that he records, that he tried his best and to dispose of things in Ohio, but he just felt like he kind of failed. But I think he did the best he could. I think he's fine. And it is a little personal, so we get this from the historical revelation. The revelation, which is somewhat personal in nature, may not have been read during the worship services on the 8th of July, as were at least some of the other revelations dictated that day. Joseph Smith and his counselors in the first presidency included a transcript of the revelation in the letter they wrote to Marks and Whitney and encouraged the two men to follow the revelation's direction. And a very sad final note, Partridge was present when the revelation was dictated and probably made the copy shortly thereafter. This is the latest possible copying date is the 27th of May, 1840, which is the day he died. So that's not to go too far into the future here, but this is maybe the last thing that Edward Partridge did before he passed away. So content and footnotes for this, the text reads, and this is the struck out part. It says, "And whatsoever remaineth, let it remain in your hands." That is struck out. But it says, "For what is property unto me, saith the Lord? Let the properties at Kirtland be turned out for debts, saith the Lord. Let them go, saith the Lord. And whatsoever remain, let it remain in your hands, saith the Lord." So, hey, man, sell your land, pay off your debts. That's what Oliver Cowdery did. We didn't appreciate it when he did it, but now we have a revelation to do it here. Footnote 4 for this says, Marks was engaged in selling Mormon property in order to pay the debts of Joseph Smith and Rigdon. So he was already kind of in process of it. Revelation also says, "Is there not enough room in the mountains of Adamond-Ioman, or upon the plains of Olea-Shaniah, or in the land where Adam dwelt, that you should not covet that which is but the drop, and neglect the more weighty matters?" So, could the amateur historian be wrong? Well, I think so. Footnote 7 for this says, "Here and later in the Revelation, Mulholland's copy uses the spelling Adamond-Ioman, According to John Corll, when Joseph Smith applied this name to Spring Hill, Missouri, he gave the English interpretation of the name as, quote, the Valley of God, in which Adam blessed his children, unquote. Now, I am still of the opinion that many meet God is also a good English interpretation, but I'm not going to argue with Joseph Smith on this. So we'll just call that the amateur historian doing his thing. We also get some notes here from the Book of Abraham, and just so that you know, that Olea Sheneha, that the Book of Abraham says that Sheneha means the sun, and Olea is the moon. So just so you know, this is the valley of moon sun or moon and sun. But that's some interpretations of those words from the Book of Abraham. Text says this about William Marks. Let him reside in the midst of my people in the city far west, and let him be blessed with the blessings of my people. Footnote 13 to this says, Kirtland President William Marks was apparently intended to replace Thomas B. Marsh, who was serving as the pro tempore president of Zion. And just as a, just so that we're on the same page, this is a picture of William Marks, and this is a picture of somebody depicting William Marks. And those are both from, well, the first one is accurate. The second one is Your Humble Servant. And that was a shameless plug for 6 Days in August, which came out last year. Anyway, moving on. We don't need to get into that stuff. Anyway, we get a chastisement for N.K. Whitney, for Newell K. Whitney. It says, let my servant M.K. Whitney be ashamed of the Nicolaitans, and for all their secret abominations, and all of his littleness of soul before me, saith the Lord, and come up unto the land of Adam-diamon, and be a man bishop unto my people, saith the Lord. Not in name, but in deed, saith the Lord. Now, the punctuation I got a kick out of man bishop, but anyway, that's probably not how you're supposed to say it. Footnote 15 for this says, 10 days earlier, when a stake of Zion was organized in Adam-diamon, Vincent Knight was appointed the bishop pro tempore. It may have been intended that Knight, who had previously served as a counselor to Bishop Whitney in Ohio, would be replaced by Whitney when Whitney arrived, but that never happened. And then we get the blessing for Oliver Granger. This is where we'll end it off. Therefore, let no man despise my servant Oliver Granger, but let the blessings of my people be upon him forever and ever. Amen. And a sad footnote here about Oliver Granger. It says, Granger may have been looked down on by others because of his partial blindness. He had lost much of his eyesight in 1827 from exposure to the cold. Don't make fun of blind people. That's not very nice. And apparently the Lord sort of bolsters him up and defends him. So that's what we have for this episode today. This is a gargantuan moment. I keep saying that over and over again, but you have Oliver Cowdery getting excommunicated, you get the church reorganized, and then you have the name of the church, tithing, the disposition of the tithes, right? How do you organize stakes? All of that is here. So these are major things that we use very, very actively in the church today. So there you have it. And also a shameless plug to a movie that I was in. But anyway, enough of that. Thank you very much for joining us again. And as we move forward, we're going to be getting into a little bit further into some doctrinal issues and eventually into Nauvoo. So we're coming towards the end of this year. Glad you're staying with us. And until next time, this is the amateur historian once again saying, record your life, keep a journal, keep your records, because your life is worth remembering. Have a good week.